Believe it or not, but the recent chapter 69 of Kagurabachi has gotten so many cogs in my head spinning that I just had to talk about it. Alright, so on a surface level, this chapter seems pretty tame, right? We get what seems to be a romance B-plot that takes center stage this chapter. Through it, we also get a quick little update on Chihiro versus Hirohiko. And then the chapter ends off by Yodi finally fully breaking the seal on her memories, to which she's then able to protect her classmate Ikuta. Nothing too crazy, right? Wrong. There is so much juicy nuance, hints, and setup in this chapter that I feel completely flew over a lot of people's heads upon their initial read through. So let's break it down bit by bit and what I think it means for the story. So the first part that stuck out to me was Yodi further debating her options and coming to the conclusion that the whole situation would have been better off without her. And I think that's an interesting approach because it's true to an extent. Everyone is trying to use her as leverage. In fact, if the Masumi hadn't hidden the fact that Yodi was still alive from the Kaminabi, they'd probably be trying to do the same thing right now. And so as the situation is ramping up, Yodi is getting less and less time to decide what she actually wants to do, culminating in her fully breaking the original seal at the end of the chapter. The next thing that stood out to me was that Hokazono may have been hinting at either Toto or Kuguri's innate sorcery. As the Masumi is fending off the mobsters, Moku starts wondering if one of the Hishaku members is using their innate sorcery to brainwash the mobsters. He finds their behavior to be very bizarre, similar to how the mobsters were acting during the attack on the temple. Essentially, what it boils down to is that no matter how much fatal damage they sustain, their unhinged drive to push forward continues. I'm leaning towards this potentially being Toto's ability because what else would she have? When Ikuta was tailing Yodi, he spots Toto rallying the mobsters, and we already know that the Hishaku members are elite sorcerers, so it's not impossible. Kukuri already has his blade work going for him, and Toto doesn't seem like she's a fan of hand-to-hand combat. Mind control sorcery would then be perfect. It's not an airtight theory, but for now we can just go with it until it gets debunked. Also, this was never mentioned, but I feel like if this mind control sorcery is indeed a thing, then it wouldn't be crazy if this was also applied during the Irakuzaichi arc. Ioda said that the Hishaku were helping the Sazanami clan often lately, so it wouldn't surprise me if this was part of that. Look at the Toes fight versus Shiba, specifically Tenri. He fits practically all of the characteristics of Toto's supposed sorcery. Initially, I thought that it might be his pride or because of the Datsenseki stones, but if this was the case, then it'd be a cool piece of retroactive storytelling. Alright, so back to chapter 69. The next thing that I thought was pretty interesting was how the Masumi were keeping up with Kuguri. Are the Masumi that strong, or is Kuguri that weak? Or is it a secret third option where Kuguri is nerfing himself? See, during Kuguri's debut, he had an insane showing where he effortlessly tore through a bus like it was butter, to which Chihiro couldn't even catch up until he started mimicking sword arts. Within that exchange, we came to find out that Kuguri is a true fan of swordsmanship, and the more he enjoys the swordsmanship, the more he can ramp up in a fight. What I feel is happening in the current chapter 69 is that Kuguri can't tap into his max strength unless it's against a worthy opponent. It would be like how Kenpachi from Bleach was nerfing himself to enjoy his fights. So yeah, as a huge fan of Kenpachi, naturally I'm also very interested in seeing how Kuguri starts to ramp up in the coming chapters. This could either happen against the Masumi, the newly awakened Yodi, or eventually potentially Samura himself. Now about Yodi potentially using the EIY purity style. Since she was most likely trained by Samura, chances are that she also knows the white purity style. And I saw some people online talking about how this was already foreshadowed, considering that in both chapter 55 and chapter 58, we see a glimpse of Uraha's memory of the dojo where the white purity style was taught. Here we see 4 name tags of people who learned the style. We can assume that the most far right one is the creator of the style, Itsuo Shirakai. Since Kuguri said that only 3 people knew the style, readers were putting 2 and 2 together, thinking that it could be foreshadowing Iori since her memory was sealed. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but unless Hokazono made a slip up somewhere, this most likely wasn't foreshadowing after all. Let me explain. At the end of chapter 51, Samura gets a page introducing himself as a master in white purity style, as well as being the contracted wielder of Tobimune. However, the title of master is actually a mistranslation. In Japanese, he has the title of Shinhandai, which in English actually translates to being the assistant master. Uruha already admitted that Samura was the better user of the white purity style, and Japanese in general is read from right to left when written downwards, implying that the masters are all to the right of Samura's name tag. Unless Yodi is somehow even more gifted than her father, chances are that it's unlikely that she attained certification. And there's also the fact that the seal on her memories doesn't stop people from knowing that Yodi existed. It's just that she currently has no connection to Samura, meaning that Kukuri should technically know that 4 people were certified instead of 3. He just wouldn't be able to connect the dots. So yeah, unless Hokazono slipped up somewhere, or Kukuri wasn't privy to all the information, this most likely wasn't foreshadowing. Moving on to Ikura's story. We already knew that Ikura was impressionable from his introduction a couple chapters ago, but this chapter shows that it wasn't simply being impressionable, but rather looking up to those that are earnest or show resolve. He clearly struggles with his own convictions, and this whole ordeal with Yodi has helped him overcome all of his own problems. It's part of why he wants Yodi to be able to come back to school safely. Looking at some other translations shows this too. In his big confession in the Viz version, he says, "I need you at school." But people have pointed out to me that what he says is actually closer to, "I'd be in trouble without you," or "I'd be lost without you." It's great character building. Now, Yodi is someone who isn't afraid to stand up for what she thinks is right, as shown by how she treated Ikura fairly, even though other students didn't. The past few chapters, there's been an increase in her wanting to reconnect with her past more and more. This ultimately culminating in her breaking the seal. It makes sense that Yodi is a skilled swordsman because of the tutoring that she must have gotten prior to her having her memories sealed. Similarly, Chihiro also learned a lot of his father's blacksmithing skills during their time together. Now, part of Yodi obviously still wants to go back to school, and her closing her eyes is a callback to these conflicting emotions. We know from her time at school that she's generally against murder. If she fights with her eyes closed, she doesn't need to see the horrible things that she's about to do, which in a way is similar to her father, except he got rid of his eyes permanently for an even stupider reason. But her closing her eyes could also just be an echolocation skill that her father taught her how to use in case something happened to her eyes. Back to Yodi's choice of keeping her memories or going back to school. Whatever option Yodi ends up choosing, I'm sure we'll get some good character building from it. Yodi now having fully unlocked all of her memories means that she fully understands the benefits and the drawbacks that existing in either worlds have to offer. Chihiro gave his perspective about how the time that he spent with his father was important to him, but depending on whether or not Samura shows up within the next few chapters, this could heavily impact Yodi's choice too. Ever since Samura betrayed the Kaminabi to go rogue, I felt like he had major death flags hoisted above him. Yodi now awakening her past memories, and with it, the skills that Samura taught her, only but adds to the already huge amount of death flags. But more on that in a bit. When I was listening to the Honored Ones podcast this week, they mentioned how they felt like Yodi's awakening was a weaker version of Hakuri's in terms of execution. Which, to be fair, I'll give them that. It has less setup, and as such, you never expect her to awaken as a fighter at all. However, where our opinions differ is that I never felt like this was a payoff to begin with. While in a conventional sense, this is indeed a setup and payoff, I feel as though the payoff that we're experiencing now is merely part of a bigger setup. See, while this portion of the arc is currently centered around her, it's important to not forget what the arc is actually about. It's the sword bearer assassination arc. This means that the sword bearers are still very much so on the chopping block. Yodi awakening is merely a stepping stone for that. See, the fact that she broke the seal on her memories must mean that Samura's memories of hers should return as well. We know that Samura is someone who's prone to feeling incredibly guilty about his actions. and him not being there to protect his daughter that he forgot about while the Hishaku were chasing after her just might be another thing that adds to the long list of things that he feels guilty about. In other words, I feel like the death flags for Samura are once again full on display. The most important part here is that Samura's owl has been monitoring the entire country with a keen eye for days now. While it is indeed true that he's only been looking for the enchanted blades up until now, his memory of Yodi returning might throw a wrench in his priorities. For the plan to seal Yodi's memories to work, the Masumi need a strong power source to power the seal. That's why they wanted to use the magic lantern as a battery, hence why they need the key to open it up. However, the lantern is currently powering the barrier that stops all surveillance sorcery. I feel like if they pulled the plug on the barrier, that Samura would show up to protect Yodi. I think it's safe to say that Samura is currently the strongest active character in the series. It's to the point that both the Hishaku and the Kamunabi are both trying to tiptoe around him. And while they might not be able to beat Samura in a fair fight, if they beat his daughter, they could pressure him into a situation where he still loses, like dying for her or getting blindsided. Depending on how that plays out, I think Yodi will inherit Samura's blade, but the cost being that she obviously isn't as skilled with it yet. With this, the power balance will stay stagnated again, but in a way that allows the Hishaku to move. Once Samura is out of the picture, Hirohiko can finally make his move openly using Kumeyuri. This in turn would allow Chihiro to also reconnect with Enten, and we'd be able to see just how much his connection with it deepened because of him becoming a better swordsman. Something that I've picked up on is that all three arcs of Kagurabachi focus on Chihiro gaining different and diverse allies. In the first arc, it's Sharu and Shiba, in the second, it's Hakuri and Hyuki, and in the third arc so far it's been Uruha and Iori. At first, I thought that Hokazono might be trying to set up a typical 3 to 4 man squad that would go through the story together. But what I realized along the way is that if the Hishaku have 10 members, then it'd be smart for Chihiro to also have a pretty big gang of reliable allies. Especially since it would be impossible for Chihiro to wield 6 enchanted blades at once. Here, each ally on Chihiro's team would bring uniquely useful abilities. Sharu for healing, Shiba for movement, Hakuri for storage, and Hyuki, Uruha, and Iori for manpower. With Iori gaining fighting skills and being propped up to eventually succeed her father as the next wielder of Tobimune, I think it's obvious that if she decides to keep her memories, that she'd be a prime candidate to join Chihiro's gang. If she decides to go back to school, well, at least Ikura would be waiting for her.